All right, welcome back to the Mastering Rod Building Podcast, everybody. I got a fun one for you today. Uh, an old friend of mine and someone I've learned a lot from. And I was thinking about this, and I'll do the introduction first, but then I have a funny story to tell that I'd kind of forgotten until we got this thing lined up. But my guest today is none other than Detective Sergeant retired Randy Butters, aka Buzz Butters. And if you've been in the rod building game at all, you probably have heard of or met or been influenced by Buzz. He's been building rods for 40 years. Notably, he's an instructor at Mudhole. He teaches both online and in-person classes and has done that for more than 15 years. He's been teaching high school rod building classes since 2003. He's hung his shingle out, been a professional rod builder for 30 years, B&B custom rods. And he also these days does a ton of prototyping of rods, kind of map and guide trains and handle links and layouts and all this kind of stuff for a bunch of OEM companies. So he kind of is a contract expert and a heck of a nice guy. Please welcome Randy Buzz Butters. What's up, Sarge?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm honored, Bill. I listen to a lot of your podcasts and
Well, thank
get a
you.
lot of great information from them. So I'm honored and humbled to be here. Thank you very
Well,
much.
I'm humbled to have you. This is funny. I had forgotten all about this, and I was digging through some of my stuff. And I'm a notorious pack rat. And Buzz has been building rods for more than a decade before I got started. Even though he's somehow younger than me, which I don't know how he pulled that off. But I first met Buzz a long time ago. You were making custom yarn strike indicators
I
like
just now
25
remembered.
years ago. Yeah. And so,
Yes.
it took a while for us to connect and click on the rod building, but I'm a like diehard, dead drift nympher, right? And I've always been looking for ways to nymph fish more effectively on the White River and Norfolk River in Arkansas. And I can't even remember how I found these things. It's early days of the internet, and I saw some review, and I was like, I'm gonna track this guy down. And I somehow found you, and I bought a bunch of strike indicators, and I think I still have one. You used to bag them in like a Ziploc snack bag with
Oh,
like your
sure.
card in there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man, I've still got some
Yeah.
somewhere, and they're great indicators. But it's
Yeah.
how funny that we came together through fly fishing, not through rod building.
That was a very long time
Very
ago, Bill.
long time ago. I
Yes.
know, but I can't make that stuff up, man.
No.
And so Buzz is also, a multi-species, all tackle angler, kind of fish for anything, anytime, anywhere. At some point, you're going to hear a lot about Buzz and some of his dudes that are slow pitch jigging for lake trout.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
effectively, but that we'll keep that tamped down in a secret for right now. That
All
may be
right.
another episode, but I'm just delighted to have you. And anytime I just get so excited about what someone like you as an individual, or what the high school programs and the classes through Mudhole have done over the years to bring people to the sport. It's like, any idea, like, you even have a wild guess how many people you've taught to build rods over these last 40 years?
No, but I've got a number for you. And in
Okay.
2019 BC, before COVID,
Okay.
our travel classes, our mudhole travel classes, which
Right.
is we go around the
Oh
country,
yeah, I've been to. They're
weekend
awesome.
classes.
Right.
We had 24 classes, and back then having 45 students and 7 or 8 instructors was common. So 2019 we hit 900 students face to face in one
In one
year.
year, golly. So that means
So
it's way into the thousands after all
it
those years.
it is into the thousands, and I started teaching rod building in high school for high school classes for at-risk kids. I was trying to target them
Yep.
to get them out of their social circles and get them into the fun lifelong
Right.
pursuit of fishing, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And that's when I started that, and that's how Mudhole heard of me, because I was ordering parts as an instructor, and
Sure. Okay.
I was self-taught. And then
Weren't
they
we all
called me
back
and
then,
said,
right? I mean,
"Yeah."
like, yeah.
And they got a hold of me and said, "Hey, we're just starting up, or we've had this rod building class. It's a couple years old. Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I've been doing the classes for about 15 years. So I
Wow.
can't tell you how many we've done, but I can tell you in the month of September, I did close to 90 high school students in 3 schools. So
Unbelievable.
there's a
Well,
lot out there.
thank you for doing that, just on behalf of the community, like in the industry, because it's so great. And I just, man, one of the things that I note all the time, and I know I harp on this, but there's so much access to information and so many resources. And then to be able to go and take a class where you get somebody like you or Todd or Kurt or somebody like really experienced, like over your shoulder, hands on, walking you through every aspect of the rod building. It's like, no wonder I'm to this day, I continue to be blown away. I saw a high school kid who's like the third rod he's ever built. And it's like, I can't believe how good this rod is. Like,
Oh,
it took
yes.
me a lot more than 3 to get to this point. And it's just like taking the mud hole class and watching YouTube videos, right? And it's just like, so y'all have really brought the craft along, and what a legacy for you to leave. But this is an interesting episode today. If you've taken one of Buzz's classes or you know him, he's a great storyteller. He's a very warm and fun and engaging guy, and he's kind of got a story and something interesting to talk about everything. And I love you for that. But this one is interesting because I often have some knowledge of the subject matter when I bring a guest on. Sometimes I have a lot of knowledge, and I just really like the way somebody talks about it or thinks about it or sort of lays it out, so I bring them on board. Today, we are having a topic that I literally am clueless about. That topic is, and if you've never tried to build these rods, I'm going to go ahead and warn you right now, they're among the most difficult rods to build, and we'll get into that. We'll get into why, and that's ice rods. And I try to keep an open mind, and I want to learn, and I'm always, why people would ever want to fish for ice. I have no idea. Like, I just go to my fridge. My fridge, you can just push a button. So I don't know why you guys are ice fishing, but tell me all about this, man. What's the deal?
We ice fish, Bill, because 4 to 6 months out of the year, we have no other
Well,
choice.
right, yeah. Oh yeah, you go down to the Eelpout Festival and put up the shanty and drink some cold beers, eh? Yeah, oh
There
yeah,
you go. There you go. So
yeah,
yeah, we're gonna talk about ice rods, and my
yeah,
big thing is education, and
yeah.
there are no secrets here. I'm telling you everything I know,
Right.
and hopefully we'll get a little reference material for you that you can look up later. But ice rods are tough.
Yeah.
Simply because of the thickness of the blank and the flexibility of the blank and the size of the guides, they're tough.
They are
And
tiny, and what he's referring to be specific, these tend to be short rods. What's an average length ice rod? 36 inches?
that's a little on the long side. Yeah,
Okay.
even shorter than that.
Okay, so these are very short rods. They're very fine in diameter, and by virtue of the action, like you almost can't even put them between 2 rod supports and go to wrap them with appropriate thread tension without like bending them out of shape. Some of them are solid, not even tubular. Some of them, they're made of all different. So there's just a whole lot to unpack here. But I do think it's worth noting that this is a highly Buzz. The way that we usually pick these topics, I either pick people based on what I know, but sometimes people will ask for a topic and they'll be like, "Hey, can we have gotten a bunch of requests for ice rods." So this is, people are struggling. People are wanting how they're wanting to expand and get into this and try this. So, it's fascinating to me because I've held 1 or 2 in my life. And then one time I went ice fishing in Minnesota on Lake Minnetonka, and we used like these tip ups that we weren't even using like handheld rods and reels. So
Sure.
just to be clear, we are talking about handheld rods and reels, and you can't believe how big some of the fish these folks catch through these ice holes are, right? Like it makes sense that if they'd be there, but they catch muskie, they catch salmon, I've seen a lot of big wintertime trout caught on some of these lakes. So even though it seems like miniature equipment and short rods and tiny guides and tiny diameters, this is a real thing. And it's a huge industry. As Buzz mentioned, tons of North America and Canada, that's the only game in town fishing wise for a bunch of months out of the year. So this one's going to be fun. I'm excited. We're just going to kind of, dive right into it. So tell me how you got into ice fishing rods in the first place.
Well, I got into building rods in the first place as a de-stressor after work,
Yeah.
something that I could forget about work and really focus on. And fly tying was kind of like that, but rod building was, nothing is cooler than catching a fish on a rod you've built.
It's the best.
And like I said, a lot of times in the winter, that's all we had to do. Well, back when I started rod building, there was no internet. There was one book out there that I didn't know about, and the guy who showed me how to wrap guides showed me wrong. So for years, I kind of struggled with, figuring out on my own, stress, the money expense. And so now that we've got your podcast and these classes, what I would have loved or been willing to pay when I started to have this information is just
Yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So ice rods back in the day were garbage.
Okay.
Okay, they didn't have enough guides. The blanks broke. They weren't suited for the lures, and all of a sudden, the ice fishing component industry started catching up with the open water industry,
Okay.
where it's technique specific, species specific, and things of that nature. And then we'll get into even size specific. And then it really took off because
Yeah.
the purchasing and the manufacturing of ice rod components, especially the blanks, is far less expensive than open water.
Yep.
So the average builder, once he figures out how to do an ice rod, it's not that expensive to do. And when you're ice fishing, you need a bucket, you need a rod, you need an auger, and you need a sonar unit. That's
Yep.
it. And as far as you can walk. Now you can certainly take that up to other comfort levels.
Snowmobile, tow behind shanty, sunflower heater,
There you go. There you go.
miniature kegerator.
There you go. In a cooler so it doesn't freeze. Yes.
Right, exactly. Right. Like, yeah.
Yes. So that's kind of that's kind of how I got into it. And I really enjoyed, with my association with Mudhole and some of the other ice rod companies, I really enjoyed helping design blanks for specific lures, which equates to specific species of fish.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, your listeners might be interested in hearing how an ice rod blank is made, which I
Yeah,
found.
let's talk about it because it's different. And again, you've got the challenge and expense of building a tubular rod this small in this action. You've got the consideration of extreme temperatures, which begins to make materials behave differently, right? So yeah, let's talk about that. Talk to me about these blanks.
Where we're at now in ice rod building, tubular rod blanks are almost unheard of.
Yeah.
For exactly what you talked about. They're in below zero temperatures. They're extremely fragile, and you're not using a tapered steel mandrel to wrap material around to build the blank. It's a solid blank.
Okay.
So you have two materials that you're using for these blanks: fiberglass and graphite/carbon.
Okay.
And that material is put into a mold, and it is heated with epoxy and various other additives to it, and a dowel is extruded out of a hole. So you will get a dowel of carbon, a carbon dowel, or a fiberglass dowel, depending on
So
what
it's
you're
not
going to
rolled
use.
at all. It's just a totally different method of construction. Okay.
It is. And then what you do is you put that in you use a center grinding method to sand down or to grind a taper or multiple tapers into that blank.
Okay, I was gonna say, because when you said dowel, I think of like a level taper, same diameter at both ends. So then it's from there, it's sanded down or precision ground down to get the action.
Exactly. So
I did
you
not
could
know that. That's fascinating.
you could have it, let's say a rod that you're going to use for walleyes or lake trout, where it's all the same taper.
Okay.
Or if you're going to get into what's called a power noodle, it is a taper and it starts to thin out, and then the tip is extremely light so that it detects the lightest of bites or even negative bites. So all those tapers are fed into the machine for the grinding method. You grind the blank out, and then that blank, solid blank, is your blank for that particular fishing rod, be it carbon or fiberglass, depending on what your application is.
That's crazy. I did not understand that's how they were made. Okay, so you're within that. You mentioned a couple of different actions. You can have level tapers. You can have these power noodles. So like, talk to me a little more about like what's for what, and like how do I begin to translate that to like specifications for specific applications and ways that I want to fish. I mean, like
Sure.
you mentioned some of it's species specific, but tell me more.
Sure. And as you know, having been in the industry as long as you have, there's no industry standard for power ratings.
Of course,
So
right?
one guy's medium is another guy medium light's another guy's medium heavy, and it goes the same way with ice rods.
Right.
So don't get stuck on, I'm going for a walleye with a medium power. Don't get stuck on that. Find out from the manufacturer what lures that particular blank fishes and fishes the best.
Okay.
And that's what you're going to use.
Okay.
So the ultra small, tiny little tungsten jigs, that would be a power noodle with an extremely soft tip.
Right.
Because bite detection really in ice rods is not a transmittal of vibration like you might have with open water. It's visual. It's all
Okay.
visual.
Well,
So
and
you're
some of the time
watching.
you have to fish in gloves anyway, right? Like,
Yes. Oh, absolutely. So you're watching the tip of the rod or you're watching the line. And that is for panfish and things of that nature. So you want an extremely soft tip.
right.
And then you work your way up to the larger. So small spoons might be a very thin carbon blank. And then you work your way up to the larger spoons, the jigs, the big airplane jigs for
Mhm.
walleyes, northern muskies, and then even bigger couple ounce jigs for the lake trout in very deep water.
Wow. Okay.
So you base your blank power rating on the lures you're going to use.
Okay.
And that's the easiest way to do this.
And does length change a lot? Like what would be a typical length, or what's a range of common lengths or a preferred length?
That's a really good question. And actually, over the years, it's changed a lot. Not
Has it?
that many
Okay.
years ago, it was the shortest rod you could fish.
Okay.
And now they're fishing much longer rods. But here's what it comes down to. If I'm sitting on a bucket out in the open, I can fish any length blank I want.
Okay.
Okay. If I'm in a little portable one-man pullover
Yeah.
shack, which is what I've got 28 to 30 inches in front of me where the wall is.
Yeah.
And my rod has to be shorter than that, or I'm going to bang it in the wall every time I set the hook.
And if you've never seen one of these things, almost think about trying to fish in a porta potty. I'm not trying to be crude, or there's a lot of tech, but like it is a
Yes.
compact space. It has a roof. It's protecting you from the elements. It's not unlimited space. So a short rod would be necessary for that.
Right. Then you're going to get the big hub shelters that you pop up like a big umbrella tent, or you can get 4 guys in there. You
Right.
can fish pretty much any length rod you want. You get the pull behind permanent shacks that attach to your truck that have TVs and portable toilets and the
Right.
holes drilled in them and everything.
Right.
Now you have to adjust the length of your rod based on the room in that shack. So
Okay.
it really comes down to where are you going to fish this rod will determine the length of that rod.
Okay. So it seems like that's helpful. So that's telling us how the blanks are made, talking about different powers and actions, talking about how you're going to match the rod you're using to the way that you're fishing. It seems, Buzz, like people really struggle with grips and handles for these ice rods. And
Yes.
so let's talk about that. Is that just because it's such a, and to give people a sense, most of these blanks are much smaller than a number 2 pencil at the fattest, right? Like they are closer to the diameter of a number 2 pencil lead than they are the number 2 pencil, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them are very, very small diameter, even in the butt, right? So is that why people are having, because there's no arbors or anything else existing?
There's
Or
two.
what's the deal with
Yeah,
that?
there's 2 primary reasons people have trouble with ice rods, and we're going to discuss the one right now because you brought it up.
Okay.
And that is trying to put open water grips and reel seats on a blank the size you just described.
Right.
Between all that tape and all that epoxy, if you load that blank up and you've epoxied the grip components right onto the blank, you can actually break those components apart from each other while that blank loads up. So a very simple way to solve this is you build your grip on a support tube.
Okay.
And by support tube, I mean, and Motorola actually has these in different sizes. You build your grip on a straight, very structured tube, like just think a tubular blank.
Yeah, level
Build-
piece of tube. Yeah.
Yeah, you build the entire grip on there, then take and make arbors onto your blank and put the arbors and the blank inside of that tube
Okay.
and epoxy it in there. So, and you can buy these, but typically what most anglers are going to do is they will use a carbon or aluminum arrow shaft and they'll cut it to length
Huh. Okay.
and they will build the grip first. You put your entire grip on that arrow shaft and cut off the ends so it's flush with the ends of the rods. Then just take your 2 or 3 tape arbors and tape them on so that when you slide that blank into that support tube, it's snug and you epoxy the blank into the tube, in other words.
Okay. Gotcha.
And
Fascinating. Yeah.
that solves a tremendous number of fall apart problems and
Right.
failure problems and everything else. So
Right.
build your grip on a support tube first and put the blank into the support tube when you're done.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. That makes sense. You mentioned there were two major challenges for people. So obviously the grip being one, and that makes sense. Um, just wrapping these incredibly limber, short, like I assume that's the other challenge, right?
It is, and it's a huge challenge. And when I'll get a lot of referral phone calls from builders that are having trouble wrapping these tiny guides, these micro guides on these tiny blanks.
Right.
And just as you mentioned earlier in the show, when this blank is level in your wrapper and you put the tension of the thread on and start wrapping it, you can buckle that blank in half
Right.
just by the tension of the thread.
Right.
Well, that basically those are power noodle blanks or ultralight fiberglass blanks. You don't
Right.
usually have that problem with carbon.
Okay.
Back when these first came out in my shop, I hire high school and college students to wrap the guides on my rods.
Hmm.
And when these blanks first came out, I almost had a mutiny in my shop because
Nobody wanted to
the
wrap the
the
IC.
wrapper girl said, "We are not getting paid for enough for this, and we are done with these." What made you mad at me, Butters, to make me wrap a dozen power noodles?
Right. Yeah.
So we sat down and we thought, how can we keep that blank straight while we wrap the guide when the thread tension is on it? And we came up with a very simple solution.
Okay.
And I'll do my best to verbalize this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've also going to have for your listeners on my Facebook page in the next day or two, I will post step by step pictures on how this tool works and how you can make it for about $3.
Okay. Awesome.
But think of a structured aluminum arrow shaft or even brass tubing like you get in a craft store.
Okay.
That's what's going to hold the blank in place. Chuck
Okay.
that tube into a drill and drill down into a 2 inch by 2 inch block of EVA handle foam that you would make grips out of.
Sure.
Okay. You've now got a 2 inch piece of foam stuck into this rigid tube.
Right.
Take a drill, small drill bit, and drill a center hole in the middle of that EVA.
Okay.
Now you're going to slide that. Remember that the blank does not have a tip top on it. It's
Okay.
just the bare blank, and you're getting to the part where the guides are or the blank's starting to bend. Slide that blank into that hole and push that blank all the way up into that tube until you stop just short of where that guide is going to be wrapped.
And then it holds it stiff and holds it
You
secure. So
you
you
wrap
unwrap
it,
it.
it holds it
That's
stiff,
brilliant.
nothing moves. And then for the next guide, you pull that blank out a little bit till you get to the next guide mark and wrap it again. You're wrapping it in front of that very rigid tube. And
That's
so
such a good
nothing's going to
idea.
move. Yes.
Man, I may have to try that on some little tiny ultralight 0.12 weight fly rods too. That would work. Those tip sections are a bear, and that would help with that too.
1 through 3 weight fly rods. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
They're cheap. They're easy to make. And I've gotten on one of these tools before we quote wore it out. We averaged about 500 or 600 guides before we wore one out and had to drill another piece of EVA. So just try to picture this: the blank turns inside the hole of the EVA while you're wrapping it, but nothing else on that tool moves.
Right.
It's
Okay.
just holding it rigid.
Right.
I think Mudhole is going to manufacture and maybe sell these down the road, but that would be a quick and easy way to get one. However, I will post it on my Facebook page so that you can easily make one yourself. And again, you're right; it works great with fly rods, ultralight spin rods, everything that will bend.
That's awesome. What a great idea. How long did it take you to come up with that?
Well,
One
about
rod shop mutiny, right? Yeah.
one rod shop mutiny in about 2 weeks, and we had a lot of prototypes we threw out, but
Yeah.
we got her down now, and each one of the wrappers has their little magnetic tool tray,
Right.
and they've all got one of those tools in their tray, and don't you dare take it out of their tray, or you're gonna.
I believe it. I believe it. Well, good. I'm glad you quelled the mutiny and survived it. Right. That's a good thing. Always a good thing. Talk to me too about like, and I've sort of been on this pursuit lately of building a bunch of BFS rods. Right. And I've run into some of this. You get to where the blank is so fine. Many guides have feet that are too big, meaning they don't sit flush on the blank. They overlap the blank, they overhang. That's a no-no. So talk to me about these guide trains. Now that we figured out how to stabilize a power noodle so we can actually wrap this thing. Talk to me about guides and sizes and stuff. Like in the fly space, like I've experimented with ceramic fly guides, snake guides, wire guides, single foot wire guides, like REC recoils. And I don't do a lot of cold weather fishing. But one of the things I found was that there is a difference in how well those different types of guides handle getting iced up, right?
Yes.
So talk to me about the guides. Like, are what are you typically using? How are you managing the guide foot size relative to this tiny little blank? Like, talk to me about that, son.
Well, we'll start with guide foot size and then move on to maybe guide materials.
Okay.
Guide foot size, you don't want the width of the guide foot to exceed the width of the blank, or you're not going to get it wrapped, or it'll be too much of a hassle.
Okay.
So your options are find guide feet that fit on the blanks that you're building, or grind them down so that they do fit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for the hobbyist builder and the guy that's building for himself and his buddies, grinding a guide feet thinner is certainly an option.
Yeah.
But if you're building, 6 or 7 dozen of one model, that's not going to cut it. You've got to have guides that fit. And I have found certain brands of guides will fit. Now, remember this too, and you touched on this, Bill, is we want as big of a guide ring opening as we can to cut down the icing, or at least the time that it ices up.
Right.
So we're talking small guide feet, big rings.
Right. Okay.
And to do that, I have found one brand that I've really liked is the Mudholes SSR guides.
Okay.
Which is a steel ringed insert, not a ceramic ring.
Right. Right.
And their size 6 guide feet is you can fit on just about any power noodle blank there is.
Okay.
So I really like those, and since it's a steel ring inside of the guide frame, and it's double swaged, which means they're not coming out.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And that's huge in ice fishing, because even if you're in a heated shack, you still got to get from point A to point B when it's 20 below.
Right. Yeah. And that kind of extreme cold environment is just brutal on adhesives. It just makes a lot of traditional adhesives very brittle, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So you're going to have ceramic rings popping out on you.
Right.
You're going to have them breaking on you.
Mm-hmm.
It is, especially if you drop them or if they get super cold. So I really like any type of guide, and a lot of your listeners and your builders will also realize this if they've used steel ring guides, is a number 10 with a steel ring insert is a much bigger hole than a number 10 with a ceramic insert.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So that helps during the ice up period.
Sure. Okay. It just takes longer to freeze, even if it does eventually ice up. Right. Okay.
Yes. So another consideration is that, or a very commonly used guide for running guides are single foot fly rod guides.
Sure.
The all metal ones. They're fantastic.
Right.
And you can get them big in like a size 6 or bigger. And the guide feet are a little bit wider, but they can be modified easily to fit. And I'm talking extremes here, Bill, power noodles, things like that. Right. Walleye and northern blanks and lake trout, you don't have a problem with guide size because they're going to
more down the middle. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They're going to fit. So that's something that you almost have to be able to call your supplier and your distributor and your retail guy and say, I'm building a power noodle. What guides do you suggest that I put on this power noodle blank? Because if they're selling the blanks, they've heard this question 100 times. And a lot of times they'll have guide sets available for you.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's super helpful. And so these SSR, like Sierra Romeo guides, I was just looking at them while you were talking, available on Mudhole individually as loose guides or in kits. So that's super helpful. So given these temperature extremes and everything else, so now we kind of sort of understand the blank and how we're going to stabilize that differently than a normal blank so that we can actually wrap the thing. We understand we got to use the right guides, which is a little bit of a different use case than typical for especially for the power noodles and the really small things. Are you still using like normal thread, normal finish, or are the construction methods different because of the extreme temperatures?
No, I found that size A works great, but size B seems to work a little bit better for me and some of the wrappers in my shop, because you've got that guide with that big guide frame foot on that thin blank. Mm-hmm. That B jumps up a little quicker on top of that guide foot.
Right. Okay.
It makes it easier to put it on. So A or B thread is fine, but I'm kind of switching over to B because I think it goes a little bit easier.
Sure.
And I think your other question was the finish.
Yeah.
I've never had a finish crack on me or come apart.
Okay.
They're made to bend, as you well know,
Right.
and two thin coats of finish, and we're off and running. I just don't have that. I've never had a finish failure on an ice rod
Okay.
wrap before.
Well, that's good. That's good. I hope we didn't just jinx that. I hope it's not about to start for you.
We better not.
Yeah, I really hope not. I would never do that to you on purpose, right? So, I also see like you mentioned, and I've seen some of these rods. You mentioned, let's talk about the spacing, right? The number of guides and the spacing. And you mentioned something that I feel like I've kind of seen. And again, I've not done much of this. I will occasionally see it on TV. I've watched a little bit of it on YouTube, right? But sometimes it's almost like there's 3 or 4 guides on the whole thing, and you can just, when that rod loads up, it's like, oh, this is terrible, right? So, how should I, if I'm going to go set about to build my first ice rod, how should I be thinking about number and placement of guides?
You take your same training from open water fishing for
Okay.
guide spacing for there.
Okay.
A static line deflection test where when you load that ice rod into a fishing load, the path of the line has to follow the bend of the blank, depending on where the guides are placed.
Okay.
So follow the path of the blank when it's under the load
Right.
with the line, and that's how you adjust where your guides go.
Okay. So like I'm looking at some of these blanks that you guys sell at Mudhole, right? And there's actually a surprising variety. There's a lot of different blanks, fiberglass, carbon, both MHX, V-line, like CRB. There's actually quite a few blanks out there, and like you were saying, there's a few special exceptions that are 36, maybe 42 or 48 or longer. But typically, like if we're talking about a power noodle, like these blanks, if I'm looking at like the MHX solid carbon, these are typically like 24, to 32. 30-inch blanks, 28-inch blanks, right? They're relatively short. So like on an average, let's say it's a 30-inch blank. How many guides am I typically going to have on a setup like that?
Well, I can answer this real easy.
Okay.
On a power noodle, on a 30-inch rod, I'll have 7, possibly 8 guides.
Wow. So it is a lot. Yeah.
And all of those,
because that rod bends the way it
all of those guides are in that little half circle where that 5 inches or 6 inches of blank really bends.
Yeah.
I mean, when you can take the tip of a blank and bend it and touch the other side of the blank,
yeah,
that's a bend. And so
Yeah.
I'll have 4 guides in there or 5 guides in that spot.
Okay.
On a walleye rod, straight carbon that doesn't bend much, I might have 5 guides or 5, maybe 6 guides.
Okay.
So it really depends on how much that rod bends. Now there's a blank out there called a snare rod, which you probably are not familiar with.
I'm not familiar with.
And that is a live bait presentation rod that is put in a rod holder where the fish will grab the live bait and literally hook itself because it feels no resistance. And that blank will bend all the way down into the grip without the fish feeling it. It's called a snare rod. So you've got a lot more guides there because that you don't want that fish to feel that rod load as it starts to eat on and swim away with that rod.
Right.
So again, the action of the rod determines the number of guides that go on that rod.
Okay. Interesting. That's fascinating. So so there, most of the rules of open water still apply, but it's a different game just based on the bend of these blanks and the way they're being used. That's fascinating. I see guys, you see people holding the ice rods in a weird way sometimes, right? Sometimes I feel like I see people holding it normally. Is that just the difference between like, regular North American and non-French Canadian anglers, and it's just the French Canadian ones that are holding it weird? Or
yeah, they're
weird.
They're weird no matter what.
Rod building friends.
They're weird no matter what.
You know what I'm talking about? The people holding the rod.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
There's 2 main, and it's totally comes down to comfort.
Okay.
There's 2 main ways to jig an ice fishing rod.
Okay.
Holding it like a standard spin rod, open water spin rod with the reel down and you grip it in that manner and just jig back and forth.
Right.
Then there's called the pencil method, where you literally set the rod in your hand like you are going to draw or write with a number two pencil.
Literally
And,
pencil grip.
and
Okay. Yeah.
yes, and you use to jig it that way. And again, we've already discussed, but it bears repeating. You're watching for a bite.
Right.
And so it's whatever technique works best for you. We're not feeling the bite. We got gloves on, or the way the rod is built.
Right.
We're looking for movement in the line or movement in the tip of the rod. Some guys will hold it like a pencil and just jig it and watch the tip of the rod that way.
Interesting. Okay. So there is rhyme and reason to the way they're doing that.
Yes,
Okay.
there is.
So I shouldn't skate up and like check them into the boards just because I see him holding the rod that way.
No, that would be very wrong. Yes.
My daughter and my wife would be laughing because I think they're the only people on this planet that have seen me ice skate. And to put it mildly, I'm not good. So everybody stand down. No one's about to get checked on the ice, at least not by me, because I couldn't generate enough speed to do any good.
There you go.
No.
There you
So
go.
in terms of lines, like, so has braid taken off into this, or is it monofluoro? Like, what are you using for lines most of the time?
Again, it really depends on what we're talking about. Power noodles, we'll go down to 2 pound test.
Okay.
And because with power noodles, there is a fishing reel called an inline reel.
Okay.
And picture a fly reel.
That's what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, and the line's coming off the top, but it is an ice fishing reel. It has a drag on it. It has a button that you push that then puts it into free spool and dumps the lure to the bottom of the lake
Okay.
really fast.
Okay.
And so that type of reel is supposed to keep line twist out of the line. So if you drop this little jig down on a standard spin reel with 2 pound test,
Anytime
that
they're
jig will
pulling
spin.
drag,
That
they're
jig will
generating
spin in the
yeah.
water like a top, and
Okay.
fish don't like that.
Okay.
So the inline reel is supposed to take that spinning out. So you've
Interesting.
got
Okay.
an inline reel and then a spin reel are the two basic reels that are going to go on these rods.
Okay. Fascinating. Yeah, see, there's I just thought it was a bunch of drunks on the ice trying to stay out of the house. Ice fishing in quote fingers. I'm impressed at the at how much technology and sort of thought and evolution has gone into it. I guess I shouldn't be. I should know that anytime there's people are doing this, they're being serious about it and they're getting it dialed in. But that's fascinating.
I think you should come up to Wisconsin so we can show you how that's done the correct way.
Sir, challenge accepted. Here's the thing though. I want to we got to do it at some time when we can. I'm so intrigued by and I've been talking to the Jig Pro guys about you catching all these lake trout, and we got to get that trip on. That may be first in line over the ice trip. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll do that. And we'll actually, I think we're going to start modifying some things this winter and see if we can't do the slow pitch Jig Pro
Well, I was like, I
through
don't
the
know why you
ice.
couldn't do it through the ice, right? As long
Yeah.
as you downsize jigs and use
No, I
high
don't even
flutter
know that we
jigs.
have to downsize the jigs. It's assume you have a 10-inch hole, Bill.
Yeah.
And when you're jigging those jigs, is the line going to bounce back and forth on that edge of that hole? And the answer is no, because I with the open water, I was watching that line in 100 feet of water.
Yep.
And where you're jigging, it stays vertical.
Okay.
And so I don't know why we're not ice fishing, and we're going to solve that problem this winter.
Oh, dude. First guy to ever catch a fish on slow pitch through the ice. That would be
There you go.
amazing. I'm
There you
rooting for
go.
you, man. I'm rooting.
Thank you. So to get back to our question, depending on the rod, 2 pound mono, all the way up to 15 pound mono. A lot of guys in deep water will fish braid and
Okay.
use fluorocarbon, just like the open water guys.
Okay, but it's not a sensitivity thing. Again, you're not feeling the bite. That's just to kind of reduce the resistance and have a more direct connection in deep water to the fish.
Yes, exactly the reason.
Okay. Interesting. So how deep, I mean, is there a typical depth, or it just depends on what you're fishing for and the body of water you're fishing?
Totally depends on what you're fishing for in the body of water.
Okay.
You can fish in a safe number of inches of ice in 2 or 3 feet of water, or you can fish for lake trout in 200 feet of water.
Okay, I was gonna say, when you're saying deep, how many feet is deep for ice fishing? You said 200 feet as a frame of reference. Okay.
Yeah, well, you can go as deep as you can get the lure.
Yeah.
Your sonar is picking up your jig. So you know the depth of your jig and you know where the fish is. And so you can watch the interaction between your jig and the fish, regardless of the water depth. And that's how you actually fish these fish, is watching their reaction to your jig on the screen.
Interesting. Interesting. The original forward-facing sonar-ish, right? the
Yep.
the original video game fishing.
There you go.
Yeah. Can you shoot the sonar through the ice, or do you have to use the auger to make a hole to check?
You got to shoot. You can, it's best if you put it in the water.
Okay.
But if you're just checking for depths of water, you can put a little water on top of the ice and put your transducer on there. And in
it'll shoot
most
through it.
cases with decent ice, it'll shoot through, and now you know the depth. But if you're going to fish, you drop the transducer just below the lip of the bottom of the ice hole, and then it's time to start catching fish.
Okay. That's awesome. So talk to me a little bit, not to be a stick in the mud, but talk to me a little bit about safety, right? Like obviously you're only supposed to do this when the ice is safe, right? So
Right.
I don't know what constitutes the ice being safe to go out there. I know people who live on these lakes and who do this know, but like tell me a little more about that. Is it a thickness of ice? Is it a percent of the water column frozen? Like how are we determining that the ice is safe to go out on?
It is a thickness of ice, and there are charts that your local DNR will put out.
Okay.
It's, I think, and I don't quote me and maybe
Sure.
get this wrong, but it's 3 or 4 inches safe for walking.
Okay.
It's 6 inches for ATVs, and then you're looking at 12 inches or more for vehicles, depending on the size.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean, Bill, that the ice is the same thickness all around the lake.
Well, sure, right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we've got a little device called rescue picks
Okay.
that hang around your neck, and it's
Okay.
basically 2 spikes. So if you fall through, you take the spikes and spike it into the ice and pull yourself out of the hole.
Well, I was going to ask, do people wear life jackets or what do they do? Now, what's that thing called?
Rescue picks.
Rescue picks. I've never
Yes.
heard of that, man.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure some guys I know aren't using those.
Well, when we take our high school teams out fishing, we check you just like you'd check a person for a license.
PFD.
Show
Yeah.
me-
Okay.
Show me your license. Show me your rescue picks. Okay, now let's go
Oh,
out. fishing.
wow. There's
So,
a ton of them. Ice picks. Frable makes them. Bass
Yep.
Pros got them. Oh, I like these Pick of Life ice alls. Interesting. So you just hang them around your neck, and then if you ever go in, okay.
I've used them once and they work great.
Oh, man. What happened? You fell in or you went in
Just-
after somebody?
No, it fell in. Yep.
Oh. Well, man, you are a capable and sort of thoughtful, safe person, and your background and profession and training have made you even more so. Like that scares me a little because if you can fall in, that means I can fall in. Anybody can fall in.
No, that just means
Make
I'm
sure
not
you got
paying
your ice
attention.
picks. Yeah.
No, that just means I'm not
Rescue
paying attention.
Oh well, hey, was it beer or whiskey? This particular type of not paying attention.
No, I think it was walking home in the dark, I think was the
Oh,
problem.
that'll do it. That'll do
Yeah.
it. Oh man. Well, that's so we've covered a bunch. This is actually making a lot more sense to me now that I've heard you walk through it. Like, what other pointers or pearls of wisdom would you advise people? Obviously, this tool or a tool like that to help you manage wrapping these micro flexible blanks. That's obviously really good. And you're going to put, just to be clear, Buzz and I talked about this a little bit before we got on. You actually did a really good job describing it. I understand and can visualize what you mean. But
Okay.
I understand not everybody's, a lot of us are visual learners, understanding how you would make a tool like this. So Buzz is going to put it up on his YouTube page, and we will link that in the description to the podcast so you can go there and see it. You should be able to Google it once he has it up. We'll make sure people have access to that tool. But Buzz, I thought you did a great job. I could go make one downstairs if I had the stuff right now. I feel like.
Thank you. Thank you.
The only thing a lot of people aren't going to have maybe is there's so many good preformed EVA and foam grips these days. A lot of people don't remember the blocks, right? That had
Yep.
the hole or didn't, that we all used to, buy from Clemens or wherever and turn our grips out
Mhm.
of, right? So that'll probably be the hardest part of that for people is just finding the foam, right? But Mudhole has it. You can find it.
You
others have
can,
it.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can find it. And I would think if there's enough requesting for it,
Yeah.
instead of you buying a 18-inch piece and that gives you a couple thousand wrappers, I would think if there's enough requests for it, they'll start cutting up blocks and selling them cheaper and smaller, as for making these tools. It's not that hard to do. And if you don't have brass tubing, you can go to your local archery shop, because if you're in ice fishing country, you're also in bow hunting country.
Mhm.
Go to your local archery shop and just buy a couple of aluminum arrow shafts and cut the ends off and use that to drill into your foam. And now
Okay.
you've got one that fits just about everything.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how big a diameter do you like if you're going with like a straight copper tube or something?
It, I've used probably the 3 or 4 smallest size drill bits that they make.
Okay.
So that's my center punch hole. So you're looking at bigger than a number 2 pencil, but around an arrow shaft size. I just don't have any measurements off
No,
the
that's
top of my
fine.
head.
Yeah, that's fine. People will get a
They're
sense when
they're
they
not
look at the
big.
pictures. Yeah.
Yeah,
It doesn't
yeah,
need
it's
to
not
bear a
big at
lot of
all.
load. It just needs to stabilize the, yeah,
Total stabilization. That's all there is to it.
yeah.
And you will fly down that rod wrapping those guides compared to, and we just talked about that. So let's maybe take this a step further. How do you attach the guide to the blank when
Oh,
you're
yeah, that
wrapping
is a
it?
good one. I'm
So,
using FlexCoat guide foot adhesive on
yep,
everything.
you can do that, and that will work fine as
Right.
long as everything's lined up right. Because
Okay.
you can't really move guides a lot on
Oh, I
that
hadn't
real
thought about
small
that.
blank
Trying to
or that
move them once they're
that
wrapped.
wrap
Yeah.
is coming undone. So
Okay.
guide foot adhesive, great. We can also custom cut a piece of masking tape. So, you want half the guide foot exposed. So
Mhm.
take a razor blade and cut it and don't wrap it around the rod, the masking tape. Just pinch it around the rod, one wrap of masking tape to hold it in place.
Okay.
Then when you get to removing that masking tape, you can take it and just tear it and unwrap it.
Okay.
There's also some guide attachment bands,
Mhm.
which is Mudhole's version of when people have braces, those rubber
Like the
bands.
dental ligatures or whatever they call them. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
And you can buy those from Mudhole, and they work pretty good.
Okay.
They'll hold a guide on a real small blank. You just have to work at sawing them off with a razor blade a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
you got to be able to hold that guide in place while you wrap it. And one of those 3 methods should work out for you. Again, I'm talking the extreme ice rods.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. No, but
Otherwise, a size 0 tube is going to hold just about anything on the other ones.
yeah, but it's clearly an issue because people struggle with it because I get asked, right? And people, and I don't know. Unfortunately, up until now, I've been unable to advise people and help them. But you have solved that problem. Now I
I hope
understand.
so.
I see, said the blind man, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, well, what else? So that's another good one. I hadn't even really thought about the difference of that. Like, and tip tops, these are tiny little tip tops, right? So is this something that you can get also with those SSR guides, like tip top sized for these tiny little, uh, you know, PowerFlex or TurboFlex blanks?
Yeah, and that's a really good point because for years, and still some builders, their tip top is they wrap on a single foot fly rod guide at the tip of the rod.
Okay, for their ice rod tip top.
That's their tip top. But
Okay.
now, in just the last couple of years, rod mill component manufacturers have started providing tip tops with a number size 8 or 10 ring, but down to a 2.5, 3.5 tube.
Oh,
So instead
really?
of having
Okay.
to
Yeah.
fight these wrapping these guides on these end of these rods or
Mhm.
cutting the end of the rod, you can now get glue and slide on tip tops just like you would for open water rods. Solves
Okay.
all the problems.
Oh, brilliant. There's another thing that I was looking at when I was I was trying to do a little bit of research before we had this conversation, just so really, frankly, so I knew enough to be able to ask questions, right?
Mhm.
Talk to me about spring bobbers. There's some of these things that are like attachments. Is that just to visually assist you in detecting the bite since you don't feel it?
That's exactly what they are. And
Okay.
and typically most spring bobbers are made out of a flat piece of titanium wire
Okay.
with some type of bulb or attachment on the end that is then spray painted
That's
a
high vis.
blaze
Yeah.
fluorescent color.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
run the line out the end of your tip top guide
Okay.
and you put it through the spring bobber and the jig will actually load the spring bobber. And so you're watching for any change of movement,
Okay.
including what we call a negative bite.
The
So
straightening of it. Yeah.
yep. So
Yeah.
picture this, that spring bobber is bent just a little bit from that tiny, tiny tungsten jig.
Right.
That crappie comes up and grabs it and actually takes the pressure off of that spring bobber because he's grabbed the jig.
Right.
That's a negative bite. Your tungsten or spring bobber will actually straighten out.
Yeah.
That's a bite. It's at the
Yeah.
hook.
Okay.
There are 2 very strong opinionated sides about spring bobbers.
Okay.
Some love them and won't fish without them, and others don't like the hassle and them getting iced up, and they will just as soon use a power noodle blank and watching the line move or straighten out or uncurl as opposed to
A
a spring
separate
bobber.
piece that attaches, right? Yeah. But they're serving the same purpose essentially. Yeah.
It is. It's a
Okay.
personal preference thing, and there is one ice rod technique or method where they're almost mandatory, and that's called a hole hopping rod. And a hole hopping rod, remember we were talking, Bill, about 28 inches or 38 inches long.
Right.
Hole hoppers are 50 inches or longer.
Okay.
So what you're doing is you're standing up and you approach the hole. This is usually in very clear ice, very clear water, shallow water where we don't want to spook the fish.
Okay.
And so you walk up to a hole, and with that 50-inch or more rod, you drop your jig down in there and then you jig it. And with my vision, if a tip of an ice rod is 50 inches away, I'm not going to see that bite move.
Okay. Yep.
So I would have a spring bobber on there so I can watch that spring bobber change.
Okay.
And when it changes, now I can set the hook.
Okay.
But again, a lot of guys use them and love them. Some guys don't use them, but that is definitely something that you want to keep into your arsenal. And now let's take this one step further since you brought up spring bobbers.
Sure.
How are you going to attach it to the rod?
Right.
Okay. Some places will sell you heat shrink to heat shrink it on the rod.
Okay.
That's great. But when you use a heat gun on the heat shrink, there's a very good chance you're going to melt the blank in half.
Oh gosh.
So you simply wrap it as if you would wrap a guide.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And put finish on it. Or
Okay.
what some guys are doing is they're taking a size 0 or size 1 tube that we use to hold guides on,
Mm-hmm.
and they're laying that on top of the or on the rod, and they're sliding that spring bobber down that hole on top of the blank.
Huh.
So the tubing acts as a collar to hold that spring bobber on top of the blank, which means you can adjust the length of the spring bobber by sliding it up and down underneath that tubing.
Interesting.
Did that make sense the way I described it?
Yeah, it did. So you can kind of dial it into the application and use the whole thing or only part of it, depending on what you need based on. Okay.
Or pull it off and then put it
okay.
on later because that tubing stays there. And you slip the tubing like a hot dog bun and then just slide that over the top and then put your, so you know what? I think I'll make a note and
make a picture of that too.
Make a picture of that, throw it on Facebook too.
Okay. Yeah. Cause we don't want to be melting our power noodle blanks with our heat gun.
Yeah. I did it once. That's all I needed to do before figuring something else out.
You know, it's funny. I use a lot of heat with my various finishing techniques. Not a lot of heat, but some gentle heat applied in just a certain way. And I vividly remember and I've told this story before, but G Loomis GLX blanks had just come out.
Oh,
and
no.
These were like the first $1,000 finished fly rods, and the blanks were like $595 or something. And I got a bonus check in one of my first jobs, and man, I went straight and ordered a G Loomis, GLX 9-foot 5 weight and 9-foot 4-piece 5 weight. And I mean, this thing, I remember just being like, this blank is so expensive. And I was applying some heat to the first guide in from the tip top, and the blank just goes, dude. And I mean, I threw up a little in the back of my mouth. I was so sick. But thank God they're such nice people. I called them and I told them exactly what I did, and they're like, yeah, send us back that next section, or the two sections below it, so we can make sure all the ferrules fit, and we'll send you a new one. It's like, oh, thank you so much.
that was so nice of you to bare your soul in front of all your listeners and tell them
look, man,
how bad you screwed up, Bill. That was very nice of you.
We could do episodes on nothing but that. That is one way to learn, right?
It is.
I've learned a lot that way. As my grandfather used to say, if you're going to be dumb, you better be tough, right? So I've developed, I've learned my share of hard-headed lessons and have calluses from certain mistakes, and that was the day I learned to be real careful with heat on the tip section of a
definitely.
And of course, those things were like size 4 tube or something. They were the smallest diameter tip blanks I had ever seen at that point, and I probably should have pumped the brakes a little bit, but no, I messed it up. But you live and learn.
Yes, you do.
It still hurts a little bit. Still a little Still a little sore on that one.
I
Still
could
have that rod.
I could see the pain in your eyes while you were telling the story. So yes.
Oh man. Well, super helpful. I'm curious, and maybe this is going to be like a reach, but I've had this learning in fishing over the last 5, 6, 7 years since I've been really heavy into this slow pitch jigging for bottom fish. There are
Hmm.
fish I'm very familiar with catching, and the one I have in mind is a scamp grouper, right? And it's a wonderful table fare. A lot of people would say it or a yellowmouth grouper or yellow edge grouper, either one of those three, maybe among the very best white meat fish you can eat anywhere in the ocean. But when I started jigging deeper and we started catching these scamp out of 300 feet of water instead of 100 feet of water, it was almost like a different fish. They're
Hmm.
eating different things. The water is colder, and you like get a really different texture and firmness to the meat. Um, do these fish that you're catching from under the ice, do they taste the same as if I catch a crappie in the open water in the spring, is that going to taste the same as a crappie I catch in the wintertime? Or
Not even close. Wintertime are so much better.
are they? Okay, I was wondering because
Yes.
the
Well,
deeper, colder water fish for the ones we're chasing are so quality of the table fare is a reason to get into this technique.
I know of some anglers who will not even target certain species in the summer months because the water's too hot
Right.
and the texture of the meat and the taste of the meat just isn't
Not
that good.
good. Okay.
But you got to figure it's well below 34 or 32 degrees at the surface because it's frozen.
Right.
And the fish's metabolism slows way down when that water gets colder.
Right.
And I think any fish pulled out of that cold water
Firms
is
them up. Yeah.
far superior to a warm water fish.
That's
Yes.
so interesting. That I would have speculated that, but I just don't know because I've never done it. Right. So that's
Mhm.
fascinating. So that's another okay. Yes, I'll come on the trip. We'll get
All
up there
right.
and I'm gonna
Good.
eat the best crappie and walleyes I've ever eaten. I
Yes, you
think they're
will.
pretty good when I catch them now. So if they're even better out from under the ice, they're gonna be pretty darn good.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. So are you guys eating the lake trout too sometimes?
Oh, yes.
Is that
Oh,
good
God,
table fare?
yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Because those things get pretty big, man.
They get
I've
very
I've
big.
I've occasionally encountered those. I don't know. I think I've caught a couple in one of the Great Lakes, and I've caught them kind of randomly a few times. I never really targeted them or done that specifically, so I just don't know much about that fish. But um, that's fascinating, man. What else? Any other gems or tips or things you've learned?
Well, we did the make sure you build your grips on a support sleeve. That's
100%.
huge. And the tool for keeping the blank is going to solve a lot of problems.
Yeah.
I think component selections can sometimes be a learning curve.
Yeah.
And instead of reading what the manufacturer sticker says on the blank, light, whatever, call your supplier up
Yeah. Yeah.
and tell them this is what these are
Right.
the lures I'm going to use on this rod. Don't worry about the species, micro tungsten jigs.
Right.
What do you have for a blank that will work with these jigs so I can visually see the bite? And what do you have for components and guides that go on there? Because grips, you can put any grips on you want as long as it's comfortable in your hand. That's all that counts.
Okay.
So the grips is wide open,
Right.
wide open. But
Literally, because it's
but
not a feel on the
yes,
bite. Right. Yeah.
no, but call your supplier up and tell them
Okay.
I am fishing in 50 feet of water on Devil's Lake for deep water perch with a lot of hardware. What is my best blank for that?
Okay.
And then
And
they're going to send it saves a learning curve and a lot of money.
okay, well, that's good to know. Yeah, because it would literally be like a start from scratch thing for me. Thankfully, I know you, and I could call you and say, "Hey, man, put me together something." But it's good to know. Yeah, it's funny that goes back to the days of Bob McCamey, who's at Mudhole now, back when he had Custom Tackle Supply. Um, it took me years before I could confidently order everything I needed for a build and be sure I was getting the right stuff. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if you're at all confused, right, or not sure what to get, call whoever you're buying the blank from. Tell them it's great advice, Buzz. It's good advice for any kind of rod, but especially if you haven't done these. There's not. It feels like there's not as much information out there about ice rods as there is about fly rods, bass rods, inshore rods, saltwater rods of certain types. Maybe there was and again, I may just not be looking in the right places out of ignorance, but that's good to know. And I suspect you may get a couple of emails or phone calls or questions at classes from people too. Now that they know you're an
Yes.
authority on the topic.
Well, not an authority, but at Mud Hole, considering they're all from Florida, that makes me an authority.
That
So
makes you
yeah,
that makes you
yeah,
a de facto, yeah, a default expert, right? Yeah. You
yes.
have
I
seen
so
frozen water before. That puts you ahead of Jake Hutchison.
oh yeah, way ahead of Jake Hutchison. So I wouldn't put myself up there with the best, but when it comes to ice rods and people from Florida, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I have a
You're
bit of an
elite,
edge.
baby. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I have a bit
You're
of
an
an edge.
honorary Canadian. Yeah.
Oh, I've been called that many times.
All
Yes,
right. Fair
yes.
enough. Fair enough.
And you
Uh,
know, you that kind of brings up, if we've got a minute yet,
yo,
we're
100%.
not going to talk about rod building. What about the guy who just goes to the store and wants to buy an ice rod?
Well, sure. Let's talk about that. Like,
Yeah,
they
and
don't sell them where I am. I've never seen one on the shelves in Alabama. So, talk to me about that. Same deal. Go to your shop, find someone who knows. And
it's the same thing. Look at them.
okay.
Are the guides in line?
Mm,
If the guides aren't in line on a mass produced rod, you can pretty much guess they didn't take the time to do a proper job
anything
on
else
anything
right? Yeah.
else. Right.
Hmm.
But go back to what we said at the beginning of this podcast, with proper number of guides and properly spaced.
Okay.
Take your reel with line in it to the store.
Okay.
Okay. Put the reel and line on that rod, run the line through the guides, and put a little bit of a fishing load. You know, don't high stick it and break it, but
Right.
put a little bit of a fishing load on that blank. And does the path of the line follow the path of that guide when it bends? If you have real sharp angles and you have large areas where it looks like it's an extreme angle, that rod's going to fail when you set the hook.
Okay.
Set it down and go look for something else.
Okay.
So you know, you got to be careful. Obviously, the heavier the rod, the less we're concerned about large number of guides. But when you're talking panfish rods,
Yeah.
they need to have a bunch of guides on there. And I have been extremely fortunate in the rod building world where I've built prototypes. Excuse me, where I've built prototypes ice fishing rods for companies that mass produce them.
Hmm.
And sometimes the companies will build exactly what I sold them,
Hmm.
and they love it, and their customers love it. And sometimes that company will look at my prototype and they'll want to save 3 cents here and 6 cents here
out of the guide train.
by taking 2 or 3 guides out, and they send me that rod and I go, oh my God, get ready for some returns, guys,
Yeah,
because
this ain't
it's
it.
gonna fail.
Right. Okay.
And so just be cautious of that. And if you're
Okay.
going to spend money on an ice rod, load it up, put that line through it. And does it look like it's following that path of that blank? If it is, go out and have a great time with that mass produced rod.
Perfect. Oh, that's awesome. Who are some of the big manufacturers of these rods?
Well, there's actually a number of them out there. You're
Okay.
talking the commercially made rods, right?
Yeah, the finished rods. Yeah.
Yep. Tuned up custom rods has a nice line of rods. They're pre-built rods.
Okay.
The heavier rods like walleye, salmon, steelhead, Lakers. There's a company called Hot Rods. That's HAAT rods.
Okay.
They've got a very good line of rods in the heavier rods. They also work with automatic hooking devices like the jaw jackers, the automatic fisherman.
Okay.
Those rods work very good for that.
Okay.
Clam has some nice rods, CLAM.
Okay.
They've got some good custom rods. So there are some companies that are out there. Just like open water, Bill, if a company has crap for rods, they're not going to be around much longer.
Yeah.
So the companies that have been around for years and years and years is probably because they have quality rods that last.
Okay.
And that's why a phone call to those mass produced companies, say, this is what I'm looking for. What model do I buy?
Okay. Super helpful. Yeah. Super helpful.
And
It's fascinating, man. I'm gonna have to build one of these things now.
Yes, you are.
I've got my interest completely peaked.
you're gonna build a power noodle for panfish.
Okay.
Then you're gonna build a lake trout rod for jigging deep water. Then you're gonna come up to Wisconsin and we'll put them to use.
Done. All right. Sold. You got me. And I will commit to that, and we will post up some pictures of the rods and the fish.
Excellent. I would like to take, if I could just take a second and mention a couple of manufactured blanks that I really enjoy, if you don't mind.
Please. Yeah. No.
And that
it'd be
is,
helpful. You're the expert, man. Educate
What-
us.
Yeah, Mudhole makes an MHX brand blank
Mhm.
in solid fiberglass and solid graphite. Phenomenal. V-Line, that's a capital V dash LINE,
Okay.
has blanks. They sell all the components, grips, guides, the whole deal. But they have an amazing lineup of blanks. Not only are the tapers really, really good and consistent, but they come in multitudes of different colors of blanks.
Yeah, they've got some
And
really
and
nice paint jobs. I'm looking at those right now. They're pretty.
yeah, and think about this, Bill. If you're going to sit on a bucket and stare down a hole for 8 hours, waiting for a fish to swim by,
Yeah.
you should at least look good while you're doing it, even if you don't catch fish. Would you agree to that?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, what's as long as you're building custom anyway, it might as well be gorgeous, right?
There you go.
Yeah. Oh,
So
that's
those are
awesome.
two of my favorites. There are other good blank companies out there, but I found those two companies to have very consistent tapers and quality of blanks throughout the years. I enjoy those, and I'm always experimenting with new brands and new makes and models too.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, well, man, Buzz, it's been super helpful. Like I knew it was going to be, and I'm honestly intensely interested now. I'm going to take you up on this. I'm
All
gonna
right.
get you some help and help me pick out the right two blanks and components, and I'm going to build these things, and we're going to do it. This is fun. I love building new stuff. I need help with this. I don't. I've done so little of it. Basically none of it. It's hard to know how to build it if you don't know the technique.
Right.
So
Well, I
I
really appreciate you getting a hold of me, and hopefully this is going
absolutely.
to help some of your listeners with that are new to ice rod building to take care of some of those problems.
Well, it's funny because we kept getting the demand, and the podcast guys were like, "Hey, we need to do an ice rod episode," and I was like, "Guys, I would do it. I don't know how to do it, right? Like I can't." And then I was kind of struggling with like, who should I get again? Because a lot of the rod builders I know are down here, right? And it's
Hmm.
not a thing that we do.
Hmm.
And so I was kind of talking to Aaron Lowe, right, who has gone to the classes, has taken metal classes, and has helped you guys out occasionally since when we have a class in Mobile or close to us. And he was like, "Hey, Buzz Butters," and I was like, "Really, Buzz?" He's like, "Yeah." And all credit to AA Ron for giving me the referral and the hookup with you. But I was like, "Oh, that's going to be easy. We can definitely get Buzz."
There you
So I
go.
appreciate you taking the time. And really, I know it sounds like I'm sort of polishing the apple for you, but I'm so I'm so grateful for all the people you've brought to the craft and everybody that you've taught, and just you've always been a really great mentor and information sharer to me over the years, and I can only imagine countless others. So thank you very much for doing that because it makes the world a better place, and you're a solid dude, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm humbled by those comments, and I appreciate it very much, Bill.
And for those who are watching, people choose to watch this on YouTube. That's one of the best looking hats I've ever seen in my life. I mean, you look like a supermodel in that hat.
Hey, this is no kidding. This is my going out to eat with my wife
Oh,
hat.
that's your dress hat.
Yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't get fish guts on it or blood or anything else, and it's gray, so it matches just about whatever I wear. And
All
it's
right.
not a trucker hat because I have a giant pumpkin head. They can't wear trucker hats.
Okay. Yeah.
So this
That's
baby
the,
sits on the dresser until I take my wife out to eat. So
okay. Well,
yes,
true story. Kyle Welcher, the angler of the year, the Bassmaster Elite Series angler of the year last year. He he likes a flat brim hat and he likes that Richardson. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I'm more wear like a curved bill, kind of a trucker type guy, but I
sure.
have a smaller head. And he's like, "Hey man, can we get some more of these flat bills?" And I was like, "For you, I'll get them, right?" And so we got them, and they were gone immediately, right? Like we mailed the
Hmm.
ones he wanted to him, and then everybody took them. So Jack and Aaron and David Clanton in my shop are now telling me I told you so because they've all kind of worked on me on flat brims. It took Kyle Welcher to get me over the finish line, but
I actually swapped this to Jake Hutchinson in Mudhole. I won some thread. He won the hat. And I said, I'll trade you the thread for the hat. I got to have the hat
perfect,
with cloth on the
perfect.
back. And he goes, I don't know. And I threatened him. I'll be honest in front of your listeners. I threatened to beat the crap out of him in Mudhole. So then he swapped with me. And
Hey,
so
listen,
this is my going out to eat hat.
I don't wish ill on anyone, but every once in a while, when I was his age, I needed a butt kicking every once in a while. So you probably were doing him a favor whether you wound up with the hat or not. So
There you go. I
and
like
I want to
Jake a
call
lot.
out. So Buzz is in the shop actively working, and there's this young lady that has entered the podcast. Um, and I want to call her out. Hi, how are you? What's your name?
Hi, I'm Lauren.
Lauren. Okay, so Lauren has been back there working. She's doing some building. She looked like she's maybe doing a little bit of repair there for a second. She's been completely focused. When I said, Buzz, you look like a supermodel, she literally turned around and gave me a look through the camera. So she's like, all right, it's getting too thick. I can't take these guys anymore.
I think that's when she threw up in her mouth a little bit, is
Yeah,
when
well,
you
I
said
know the
that. That's
feeling,
where
right?
that
Yeah,
came
like
from.
when I melted my GLX blank. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yeah, it's very similar. Lauren wraps a vast majority of the guides in my shop. Phenomenal worker, very good attention to detail, and senior in high school. And thank God she's going to college, which is close to my shop, so she can come on
All
vacation.
right.
Hopefully, we can keep her employed. But
There we
yes,
go.
very good employee. I'm very, very lucky to have her in
Well,
the
she's
shop.
getting the shout out. She's getting the shout out. Nice Renzetti, by the way. That's my lathe of choice too. You have excellent taste in wrapping equipment.
Thank you. I love that thing.
It's man, they ruin you. You once you use one for a while, you can't do anything else. I was somewhere the other day and I was wrapping on a very nice machine, but it had no backup tension. And
Mhm.
I'm struggled, man. I kept just blowing up wraps. I was just trying to demonstrate some guide wrap stuff and I couldn't do it. So yeah, my backup tension has spoiled me. I can't live without it. But
Oh, I love that machine.
yeah, man. Well, Buzz, thank you so much for being on and thanks for educating us on ice rods. And if you want to look Buzz up, you can find him. Go to the classes page or the instructors page on the classes page at Mudhole. We'll post his information for his shop. And if you want to get a custom ice rod built, I know there's a wait period because he's very popular. He's an excellent builder and turns out a really good product, but can't recommend him enough. So thanks for enlightening us open water, I don't know. It feels like there needs to be some term like for an ice fishing ignorant person. Maybe it's redneck. I don't know. But I feel like y'all have some rednecks up there too in the ice country. So we'll have to
I'll
think of something else. She's
I'll
nodding
work
her
on
head.
that.
Absolutely, we have rednecks.
Yeah, I'll work on that. I'll let you know. We'll
Yeah,
see
let me
what.
know. It feels like an
Yeah.
opportunity for innovation. Come up with a term there. Awesome.
All
Well, hey,
right.
thanks so much for your time, and thanks everybody for tuning in to the Mastering Rod Building podcast. Please remember to like and subscribe and download wherever you get your podcast content. We'll see you next time.